So today we're going to be talking about the don'ts of making comics, because here on this channel I feel like I talk a lot about an art career, social media, animation, but I haven't really dug too deep into the world of comics, even though I just released my first graphic novel, MEESH the Bad Demon. So check it out in the links below if you would like to read it. And I also do publish my own self-published comics on my Etsy shop, where I have Succubishes, Doodlebishes, Vera the Siren, and also just some prints and other downloads. But I also would like to share some of my experiences and what I've learned from just making comics as a whole, whether if it's on webtoons, publishing a comic, self-publishing a comic, or just posting it on social media. A lot of the rules or a lot of the things that I'm going to mention today will pretty much cover for any type of comic that you make. If you want to make either better comics or be better at making comics, and by no means am I saying that I'm like a perfect comic artist either. I'm just really going to be discussing things I learned on my journey, what worked for me and what didn't. So the first don't, and I really mean do not do this, hopefully some of you will listen to me, is don't sign exclusive agreements with any of these comic hosting platforms where you're only allowed to share your comic on their platform for like either some time and then you can post it later on your own thing. I won't say any names of what platforms are out there, but if you ever do receive an email asking for you to share your comic on this one comic reading platform, but to only allow them to have access to your comic either indefinitely or for a certain time period, and then you can release it on your own social platforms later, I would highly suggest not doing them, especially if they don't pay well, and most of them that I've ever heard of don't really pay well. Sure, if it really is the only thing that you can do, go for it, but I feel like this really holds you back from reaching out to an even greater audience and establishing a name for yourself rather than just being represented by this one platform that will be representing you and you don't have the access or freedom to do what you want with your own work. I feel like that time is better off invested establishing your own name on a social platform, and you develop your own comics, develop your own following, set up a Patreon or set up some exclusive like community where people can get like early access or behind the scenes or something like that, which again, if you want to check out my Patreon, I have that, where I am now doing exclusive podcasts, live streams, and email consultations in addition to the behind the scenes and early access. Just be very wary of any exclusivity types of agreements. And again, if that's like the only option for some reason and you really can't do anything else, this is the only way you can get paid, sure, but maybe have another comic that you're doing on the side that you will be releasing on your own terms, and just leave this one comic specifically for this comic platform that offered you that offer. If you are ever approached by any of these webcomic platforms that ask for some sort of exclusivity, I really think it's gonna hold you back, because during that time you could also be developing your own brand and business and really branching a lot of things off of your own work. And that's why I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare has really been evolving as an online learning community lately, and I have to say that they've come a long way from just having classes that teach you how to develop your skills and talents in certain niches, and now they're expanding so much further and teaching people how to do things like develop their own career or brand. For example, I've been taking this moment of hiatus from animation to take my personal projects such as my books and social media further and explore ways to potentially turn it into a full-time career someday. And by no means am I planning to quit animation. I'm just saying that during the times I'm in between gigs, I still have control of my life through financial stability and fulfilling projects that contribute to my overall art journey in life, hopefully one day syncing with animation. The key things that helped me so far in life is time management, management, having personal side projects, learning business skills, and growing on social media. And I was actually overwhelmed with the selection of videos available to learn from, but I'll say my top favorites were Productivity for Artists by Brooke Glazier, Make Creativity Your Career by Ann DJ Pizza, Start Your Creative Career by Sonia Rasula, Finding Success Online by Kate Ahrens. And because I juggle so many projects at once, I figured that Productivity for Artists by Brooke Glazier would be really helpful for me in just amping up my time management skills. For any of you who are struggling to find a strategy that works for your personal time management skills, I think Brooke's class is great for you to figure out which method might be more appropriate for your art and craft making. So here I'm trying my own little Kanban board. I've actually never really done one of these before, but I thought it would be a good idea to try. So here I put my to-do list of stuff ranging from MEESH work, YouTube stuff, and Instagram comics. And then I put the stuff here, such as line arting MEESH, editing my YouTube video, and sketching my IG comic, stuff that's currently working in progress. Then, for example, reviewing MEESH color is in the waiting phase because I submitted some feedback and I'm just waiting to see what the reception is on my feedback or if the feedback is addressed by my colorist. And then once all of these things are done, I'm gonna move it down here. But I thought this was such a great, physical way of feeling the progress being made with your work. And it's also really fun to just, have your own little craft to do with this. So I'm happy to offer that the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the don'ts of making comics. So one of the biggest problems that I've seen most comic artists, including myself, experience is spending too much time on it and not knowing when to move on. I think one of the things you have to accept is to know to make your drawings clear over making them perfectly beautiful or rendered, because I do feel like, yes, there are comics where it looks like someone spends so long on each and every panel. It might have taken them a really long time, but it depends on how soon do you want to get this released and get it out, because there are things to consider, such as, will you be paid if you spend so long making on this comic? Are you hindering yourself from future projects and moving along? So even if your comic does not look the way that your usual rendered work looks like, just remember that this is the comic book version of you, not the entire artist version of you. It's only one part of you as an artist, so don't fear these less rendered drawings being the full representation of yourself, because it's the whole book that matters, not this one drawing on this one panel that not many people are going to care for. All they care about is making sure that this panel serves the rest of the story, what comes before and after it. And then that brings me to not having a pipeline that works for you, because I feel like a lot of comic artists maybe just go into comics and just don't really have a plan of how they're approaching this. And sometimes that works better for people, to each their own. But I do feel like if somebody finds themselves wasting a lot of time, it's probably because they're figuring things out as they're doing it, which is gonna happen on your first comic. That's where all the learning comes in. But there are things like not knowing when you should do rough sketches or when to do revisions or when to do the final line art and stuff like that, and what order should you approach these things, because there will be times where you're doing the line art from some pages and rough sketches still for other pages, and managing that can get really chaotic. So you have to figure out what might work best for you. And for me personally, what I do is I always section out my comics, especially for things like MEESH the Bad Demon or traditionally published comics, into parts. So I will usually have a part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and I really just focus on those sections at a time. If I have all of the rough sketches for part 1 done, all right, I'm gonna move on to line art for that, because the rough sketches for that is locked. But whatever is happening in sections 2, 3, and 4, if they're still in rough sketches, I might still need to rework them, but maybe I have part 3 figured out so that can be line arted. That's just what personally works for me, is when I associate my book with different sections, and these are not necessarily chapters, it's just managing a somewhat equal amount of chunks at a time so that I can also pace myself out. So next, I would say definitely don't over worry about the logic of your story. I feel like this even applies to animation or any other sort of narrative art, where I feel like a lot of artists worry so much about how is this logically gonna work out? Does this make sense? I feel like for me, I just dump out everything that ever comes up in my mind all in one page. I brain dump all the things I feel like should happen in the book, and then I start to make sense of it later. So what I would suggest for you to do, if you feel like you are over worrying about the structure, and then maybe your book is not fun anymore because you don't have the time to really think about how to place the more enjoyable moments of your comic, I would consider brain dumping every single idea you have, and then from then on, like, just pretend you can just grab and move those pieces you just dumped out. That is why some people use Post-its. If you like using Post-its, do that because you can move them physically. So having just a place to dump out all of your ideas and worrying about structure, and there are even going to be moments where just let the story stay fictional. This is a fictional world. This is fake. Even if you're making a slice of life, this is still fake. It's just art. Let's just remember that art is something that should be enjoyed, and not everything that we do about it has to imitate reality like exactly 100%. I sometimes feel like this kills creativity. That's why some animations just use cartoon magic. All I'm saying is to just remember to have fun and be creative with your work instead of just worrying about the logistics. So another problem I find is telling more than showing. I think this could be a preference for some people. Some people really prefer just writing a lot in speech bubbles and boxes, and sure, maybe to each their own in that case, but for me, I'm always a show, don't tell preferer, I guess, because I come from a storyboarding background, and that in itself is already like show, don't tell, because your boards have to explain what you're supposed to be pitching, but you don't explain what's happening in the boards. The same goes for comics. I just prefer understanding what's going on through the drawings and being able to communicate that clearly, because even if you could not find the right dialogue or text for it, the story still makes sense, the situation still makes sense, and you don't need to rely on words to compensate for like a not clear drawing. I also feel like sometimes this helps with nuances, like if a character is feeling some sort of conflicting emotion, that might be better off shown through facial expressions rather than having them say like, I'm feeling conflicted or something like that. But I've also gotten some comments saying that like, hey, my comics and books are not that wordy, and it's not a good or bad thing, it's just a comment that I noticed. So maybe there are people out there who do prefer reading a lot when they read comic books, but it's really up to you. So then next, this kind of falls under the time management section, is just doing everything in order, from drawing all the pages in the same exact order of the story. So this usually might not be good for time management because there are sections of your comic that might be a lot more detailed than others, and those detailed sections might last like a good number of pages or chapters. And when I say things like I do 3 pages a day, I don't do 3 extremely detailed pages a day. And things that usually make your comics super detailed is when there's like a lot of crowd shots, or if you're doing like a city or like a very detailed background. Those are the time consuming elements of my comics personally. So I know that if I'm about to approach doing like a page like that, what I will do is I will take 3 pages from totally different sections of my comics in which the rough sketches are approved to go and proceed to line art. So I would choose like a page from chapter 1, a page from chapter 2, and maybe another page from chapter 3, where maybe only 1 page is very detailed, but the remaining 2 are easier pages. Because the thing is if I did all 3 detailed pages in one day, that day is gonna be a rough freaking day. Like, I'm gonna be up, I won't have time to cook for myself. Those are the days I feel like I'm a prisoner to my desk, because doing 3 pages can mean completely different things if you are doing 3 detailed pages versus 1 detailed page and like 2 easy pages. So that's kind of how I like to pace myself out, and that is why it's also important to plan out what you're going to be doing ahead of time instead of just figuring it out on the spot, because once you figure out how your comic is going to play out and you have all the rough sketches or the thumbnails, you can just start choosing what pages to start executing line art on, instead of being like, oh, I gotta do it in order because I don't have the rest of the book figured out or something like that. So another helpful time management tool, which could really depend on whatever publisher or how much funding you have available for this, is to hire a colorist for your comic, because not all comic artists are really the ones that color their work. I've noticed a lot who hire colorists, and even when you work for a publisher, they normally hire a colorist for you. And again, some people prefer coloring their own comics, but I'm just saying, if you are someone who prefers to spend more time drawing, focusing on writing, story, and line art, then maybe you might want to consider hiring a colorist to collaborate with, of course, while knowing that this is going to come with a cost. And if you are somebody who is considering the self-publishing route, I would definitely say be realistic about how much you think you can sell, because I feel like I've experienced this, as well as other artists have, is over purchasing on stocks of goods. Like, this doesn't even have to be for comics or books that you self-publish. It could be for merch or pins, stickers that maybe might not end up doing well, and you end up with just a huge stock of items. I would also say this is why having your own social media platform might benefit you instead of doing something exclusive, because you have the rights to do whatever you want with your work. And if you have your own social media platform, you can see how people are responding to the stuff you're posting at your own pace, with your own like commentary or whatever on it. Then meanwhile, I will say, if you're a person considering the traditional publishing route, I think the biggest mistake you can make is not hiring a good agent to work alongside you, because I don't know how I would have gotten through any of my book process without a good agent. I feel like my agent is the one that has really helped and educated and guided me through the way of publishing. There were so many parts of me going through my book deal that I could have seen myself easily getting taken advantage, because I don't understand the terms of so many things, either through my contracts or through the marketing plan, or even like these subtle things that I wouldn't understand because I'm not from the publishing world. I'm originally from the animation world, and I did not go to school for this. So it's really helpful to have an agent who understands the world of publishing and will be able to kind of translate all of that for you. And I do think that the commission cost is worth it at the end of the day. Like, I would say usually 15% is an average amount, and I would say anything like more than that you should look into and question. But if you do not know where to start with an agent, this is what I would suggest for you to do. Collect all of your favorite comic books that you've ever read or that you've bought from somebody, and then just Google that comic artist's agent on Google, and they will most likely show up, because usually whenever a book deal is announced, the agent is also announced with it, or usually it will just show up in the Google results of the agency that represents this author or artist. And I would make a list of all of those different agencies, and just because that person was assigned a certain agent doesn't mean you will get that same exact agent. You might get somebody different that's still in that same agency, and at least for the most part, you can hope that they will have similarly aligned values. So that's a method I would recommend of looking for an agent if you don't know where to start, is to just base off of successful comics that already exist and the agents that have worked with these comic artists. But also do know that if you're somebody who's just starting off in the industry, it might be a little bit harder to land on an agent, especially if you don't really have much prior experience in either art, animation, or publishing to begin with. I will say that my experience in animation and my social media presence combined, I felt like helped me land on a really good agent. And then lastly, I feel like all artists are guilty of this, but a lot of people don't start their comics because they just worry about their style not being consistent enough throughout the book. I remembered so many times when I was about to start like a comic, I would just be like, ugh, I have to figure out like what style I'm going for. I don't know like what is the tone of this comic like stylistically yet, and I would just really procrastinate and hold my story off. But you just gotta do it, because first of all, your comic style is most likely going to change throughout time no matter what. Like when you're drawing in this comic, you're going to evolve as an artist because it's going to take a lot of time to work on this. It's kind of like how when you read some of your favorite mangas by mangakas, I feel like you see their style kind of change by like the most recent volume versus the first book you ever saw. Like their style changes over time, and I think that it's such a interesting process to witness. Like who cares if it's inconsistent? People still know the characters are the same. But just know that one of the most comforting things I think about is just knowing about how there are so many like either mediocre or below mediocre projects out there now. And even though a lot of these things are not my favorite, at least they inspire me in the sense that this person had such a lukewarm story idea or just not the greatest project, at least in my opinion, and that should give me an excuse to make my own lukewarm, mediocre project. So we all have to start from somewhere, you know? So don't be afraid to make your own thing just because so many cool projects out there exist and you feel like you might not stand out or anything. You never know. And I feel like there's just so much to a comic. It's kind of more of a package instead of just like you only look at the art and like that's it. There's so many other elements to it to think about, and that's why I would say just getting started is the best thing you can do because you don't learn any of these things till you start. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Again, check out the links in the description box below if you would like to get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And if you are interested in reading my comic book, you can check out MEESH the Bad Demon in the links below as well. So I wish you all the best on your comic making journey. I love that we're living in this day and age where a lot of people are sharing their comics online now, and it's kind of like a much more interesting version of the comic strip section of the newspaper, except of course now the newspaper is our phone and the comic strip section is like social media. All right, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.